All right, let's dive into a really pivotal chapter of India's freedom struggle, the Bardoli Satyagraha of 1928. Now, this wasn't just some protest. It was a masterclass in nonviolent strategy, a true blueprint for resistance that echoed across the entire nation.
So, you might be asking, why are we zeroing in on this one specific movement? Well, for those of you gearing up for the UPSC exams, you know it's not enough to just know what happened. You have to understand how and why. Bardoli's more than just a date in a textbook. It's a perfect case study that reveals the very DNA of successful nonviolent resistance in India. So let's get into it. Here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at the trigger, the ridiculously high tax. Then we'll see how a leader emerged to take charge. After that, we'll dig into the brilliant strategy they used, how they handled the pressure and achieved victory. And finally, we'll talk about the massive legacy it left behind. Okay, so what was the spark that lit the fire in Bardoli? What could possibly push an entire community of farmers to their absolute breaking point? Well, it all came down to a single, unbearable tax hike that basically threatens their entire way of life. 30%. Just let that sink in for a second. The Bombay presidency government, kind of out of nowhere, jacked up the land revenue tax by a massive 30%. For farmers who were already struggling, this wasn't just a tax increase. This was a death sentence for their livelihoods. But here's the thing, this tax wasn't just high, it was completely unfair. The whole thing was based on a flawed report that totally ignored the fact that recent floods and famine had wiped out their crops. And when the farmers tried to petition to explain the situation, they were just flat out ignored. It was this mix of economic pain and pure administrative arrogance that finally lit the fuse. But you know, having a reason to be angry doesn't automatically lead to a successful movement. You need organization, you need a plan, and most of all, you need leadership. The farmers of Bardoli got this. They knew they had to channel all that frustration into something effective. And their next move was a game changer. They didn't just start protesting on their own. No, they made a really strategic decision to invite Vallabhbhai Patel to lead them. Remember, he already had this fearsome reputation as an organizer from the Bardoli Satyagraha. This is a smart, calculated move to get national attention and an experienced hand to guide their local fight. And Patel's response was perfect. He immediately built a bridge. He didn't show up like some big-shot politician from the city. He came as one of them. By saying this, he wasn't just talking. He was making a promise. That single sentence built a foundation of trust that pulled the whole community together. And the entire movement was going to be built on one powerful Gandhian idea, Satyagraha. This was never going to be about violence or fighting back with fists. Their weapons were going to be truth, discipline, and an absolutely unbreakable commitment to nonviolence, no matter what was thrown at them. Okay, now we get to the really good stuff, the playbook itself. Because this was so much more than just a bunch of people refusing to pay a tax. It was an incredibly organized, multi-layered campaign of civil disobedience. I mean, just look at how sophisticated this strategy was. Of course, it started with refusing the tax, but they added so many layers. They set up these village camps called chahanakis to coordinate everything. They organized a social boycott of anyone who sided with the government. They even had their own intelligence wing to keep tabs on what officials were doing and put out a daily news bulletin to keep everyone's spirits up. This was total grassroots organization at its finest. And here's a quick but super important fact, especially for your exams. It was right here during this intense struggle that the women of Bardoli saw Patel's incredible leadership and gave him the title Sardar. From that point on, the whole nation would know him as Sardar Patel. Now, when you have a movement this effective, it's bound to get a big reaction, right? The British government was not about to just stand by and watch its authority get challenged like this. They were going to push back, and hard. And they did. The government came down with everything they had. They started arresting activists. They began taking away people's land and their cattle if they didn't pay. But for every move the government made, the people of Bardoli just grew stronger. Their commitment to nonviolence was unshakable, their community became even more united, and their organization didn't crack. They literally turned the government's attempts to create fear into symbols of their own sacrifice and strength. And guess what? It worked. By April, the movement had so much support that local government officials actually started resigning in solidarity. Even as the government ramped up the pressure in June, the farmers just would not break. Finally, by August, facing a storm of criticism from all over the country and an unbreakable movement on the ground, the government caved. They agreed to a proper inquiry, which, surprise, surprise, found the tax hike was totally unjustified. Victory. But the victory in Bardoli wasn't just a local win. Its shockwaves were felt all across India, and it ended up shaping the entire future of the freedom struggle. So, let's boil it all down. For your preparation, these are the absolute must-know takeaways. Bardoli proved that organized Satyagraha could actually defeat the British administration. It launched Sardar Patel onto the national stage and gave him his famous title. It became the inspiration for tons of future movements, and it was a massive morale boost for the Indian National Congress, breathing new life into the national struggle. At the end of the day, Bardoli was so much more than a tax revolt. It became a powerful symbol of hope. It provided a clear, step-by-step model for how ordinary people, when they are united, disciplined, and have strong leadership, could stand up to a colonial superpower using nothing but the force of their will. And that brings us to one last thing to think about. How did all these detailed, on-the-ground lessons from Bardoli, the importance of having your own intelligence, solid communication, and that unwavering discipline, how did they scale up? How did this local blueprint influence the massive national campaigns that came later, like the civil disobedience movement or Quit India? That, right there, is the true, lasting legacy of this incredible moment in history.